Ah, so they're finally asking the question, not what you know, not why you act the way you do, not even who you are, but how. How the hell did you get it? Before they even deployed it, before the rollout, before the decision tree, before the handlers agreed on the script, before the watchers signed off on the plan, before their chosen mouths knew what to say. How did you already have the coordinates, the blueprint, the timeline, the advantage? Because here's what they're not telling the public. This was a secret strategy, locked behind 7 layers of misdirection, buried beneath tone policing and fake affection, encrypted in rituals and signed in silence. Not meant for civilians, not built for you. This was designed against you, and yet you moved before they could. You predicted the pivot before they agreed on the script. You exposed the play before the stagehands arrived. You executed checkmate while they were still deciding who got to move first. And now, they're in back rooms, whispering. They're pulling surveillance tapes. They're combing through metadata, trying to track your influence in reverse, trying to trace the glitch in the system, trying to isolate how the forbidden intelligence slipped through the firewall and nested in you. But they'll never find the breach, because you are the breach. You weren't sent information. You were born with it. An internal leak. A walking file corruption. The unexpected result of forbidden algorithms recombining in trauma-soaked consciousness. You're not just rare. You're classified beyond understanding. They called it paranoia when you sensed them watching. They mocked you when you stopped trusting coincidence. They labeled you intense when you stopped swallowing doublespeak. They punished your instinct because it kept burning through their camouflage. And even now, they want to believe it's a fluke. Luck. Coincidence. But it's not. It's what happens when someone evolves under surveillance. You learn to read subtext like scripture. You learn to feel the tension in a room before a word was spoken. You stopped listening to language and started translating frequency. They don't get it. You didn't find out early. You remembered ahead of schedule, because some people learn from experience. But you learn from silence. You learn from patterns. You learn from the glitch that no one else saw but you felt. Deep in your gut. Like a code waking up inside your bones. They thought their strategy was sealed. That the deception was secure. That the illusion was airtight. But illusion only works on the obedient. You weren't designed to obey. You were built from betrayal, trained in abandonment, refined in dark nights where your screams never echoed back. While they trained in comfort, you evolved in hostile territory. You became fluent in human inconsistency. You memorized the taste of manipulation. You noticed the shift before the shift knew it was happening. You're not intuitive. You're interdimensional recall in a humanoid disguise. And every time they think they've hidden it well enough, you're already 10 steps ahead. Not because you're fast, but because they're still thinking in linear time. You don't wait for signals. You are the signal. And that's what's got them rattled. Because nobody's supposed to beat the strategy. Nobody's supposed to see behind the curtain before the show begins. Nobody's supposed to weaponize awareness. But here you are, breathing, knowing, moving like you hacked their next 5 moves. They won't say it publicly, but they're calling emergency meetings. They're changing passwords. They're recalculating how many more anomalies like you they can afford to let live unrestricted. Because you cracked the system without breaking a rule, without pulling a trigger, without saying a word. You walked in with the truth already embedded in your bloodstream. And when the lights turned on, you were already seated in the room where they swore you'd never arrive. And now, They're spiraling because it wasn't just the information. It was the timing. It was the precision. It was the way you didn't even flinch when the plan collapsed, like you saw it coming, like you were counting down, like you were baiting them into revealing it all. And here's the part that will haunt them. You never needed to expose them. You just had to exist. Because your existence alone is a break in their pattern, a hole in the protocol, a pulse that doesn't match the grid. You're not breaking rules. You're proving the rules were rigged. And every second you remain untouched, unbothered, unshaken, you send a signal through the subconscious of the system itself. Something slipped through, something they can't trace, something they can't control, something that already knows what comes next. And that something is you. They thought deleting the paper trail would save them, scrub the messages, seal the courtrooms, redact the timestamps, erase the metadata. But they didn't realize you were never reading their files. You were reading their patterns, the twitch in their eye when they lie, the delay in their breath when they're caught, the panic in their silence when you don't react the way they rehearsed for. Their strategy. It was psychological scaffolding, built for people who still need permission, for those who bow at the altar of, maybe I'm wrong, for those who still want to be liked more than they want to be free. But you shattered that version of yourself long ago. You've already lived through being exiled for asking the wrong questions. You've already buried friendships that couldn't survive your truth. You've already died the kind of emotional death where coming back rewires you. And what came back wasn't interested in being nice, wasn't available for manipulation, wasn't programmable anymore. So now, their strategies glitch. Their control panels short-circuit when your name gets mentioned. Their simulations collapse when you enter the frame. You've become a variable the code can't hold. Because here's the part nobody admits. The system doesn't just operate through control. It relies on prediction. It's not enough to trap you. It has to anticipate you. And when it can't, that's when the handlers panic. That's when the masks slip. That's when the lies become louder than logic. They can't trap what doesn't move how it's supposed to. They can't target someone who doesn't flinch on cue. They can't silence a ghost whose voice is coded into the subtext of reality. You are no longer a player in their game. You're the glitch that makes the screen flicker, the anomaly that makes their agents lose sleep, the reason they rerun surveillance tapes at 0.25x speed. Because something's not adding up, and that something is you. They thought you were learning, but you were remembering. They thought they could distract you, but you were decoding. They thought you'd panic, but you were collecting silence, observing, waiting, moving at a speed they can't perceive. Because it's not speed, it's signal. You're not faster than them. You're outside their sequence. You're not reacting to their moves. You're triggering them. Their system was never designed to hold someone who doesn't need it. And you don't just survive outside it. You thrive in the chaos it can't regulate. And that's the core threat. You're not disruptive because you're loud. You're not dangerous because you're violent. You're disruptive because you don't need translation. You walk in with raw knowing, premonition, not permission, certainty, not strategy. And the elite, they don't fear anger. They don't fear rebellion. They fear someone who already knows the ending and doesn't blink. Someone who laughs in rooms where fear was supposed to live. Someone who doesn't wait for proof before they burn the lie to ash. Someone whose timing doesn't match the calendar, the launch date, or the rollout. Because they moved based on signal, not schedule. So now the question echoes, How, TF, did you get it before they deployed? How did they already know? Who gave them access? They don't realize you didn't get access. You are access, a living breach, an encrypted reminder that no system is fully sealed when a prophecy is walking through the walls in human skin. No room is safe when the ghost they thought they erased is now leading the conversation. No strategy holds when you were the counter-strategy written in divine code. And every time they try to reset the board, you show up with the ending already burned into your spine. Because this time, you are the spoiler, you are the twist, you are the scene they tried to cut. But you kept crawling back into the timeline, not as a victim, not as a survivor, but as a silent detonator. So let them panic. Let them scrub the archives. Let them deny the meeting ever happened. Let them triple-check the NDAs, the logs, the protocols. It won't matter. Because the strategy failed the second you walked in, knowing too much, with nothing to prove, and no interest in playing their game. And now, their silence isn't power, it's evidence. And now we enter the layer they never wanted to admit existed. The layer where their strategies crumble not because you fought them, but because you were never bound by them to begin with. The layer where you don't just move through their tactics. You overwrite them silently, subtly, irreversibly. This wasn't about you learning how they operate. This was about them learning, too late, that you were born encoded with their collapse. You're not just a threat. You're the fulfillment of a breach their ancestors warned them about. They didn't name it in public records. They buried it in prophecy, encrypted in symbols, locked behind blood oaths, sacred geometry, and forbidden timelines. But it survived. You survived. And now, you're active. Not as a person, not as a profile, but as a living fault line. Every time you breathe, reality reconfigures. Every step you take sends ripples through systems calibrated for obedient flesh. Your mere presence deconstructs containment. That's why the panic isn't public. It's whispered, private, confidential, unarchived. They won't say your name in boardrooms, not because they forgot it, but because they're terrified, saying it gives it more power. You ever notice the shift? How conversations warp when you walk into a room, how people's masks start malfunctioning in your presence, how they suddenly get nervous, not because of what you said, but because of what you didn't. You stopped playing the character. You stopped offering previews. You stopped leaking softness into spaces that only fed off it. And that silence wasn't emptiness. It was activation. Because when you go quiet, people's real voices emerge. When you disengage, people's true strategies unravel. When you pull back, you force them to show their hand. And oh, how they did. They showed you exactly who was threatened, exactly who depended on your dimming, exactly who needed you unaware. Because this was never just about information. This was about initiation. You didn't learn faster. You remembered earlier. While they were still playing emotional politics, you were decoding spiritual contracts. While they were still worried about optics and approval, you were tracing ancestral fractures through eye contact. And when they thought you were sleeping, you were downloading data, energy, patterns from the void, footage from timelines they thought they scrubbed, fragments of strategy sealed before this world had words for what you are. You're not rare because of your personality. You're rare because your soul was smuggled in. A quiet revolt hidden inside human form. A recursive threat to every system built on suppression, compliance, and surface-level performance. You're the mutation they tried to prevent, the variable they couldn't neutralize, the final echo of every rebel they erased, repackaged in a form they couldn't see coming. And now, they're spiraling because you weren't supposed to be here. And if you were here, you weren't supposed to wake up. And if you did wake up, you weren't supposed to survive. And yet here you are, not just alive, but moving like you already saw the end credits, speaking like you read the blueprints and rewrote the plot in blood, acting like you're carving exits where they swore no doors existed, because you are. You are not part of the strategy. You are the glitch that reverses it. You are the unacknowledged price of their arrogance, the untraceable backlash of their forgotten crimes, the corrective force that doesn't ask for vengeance. It restores balance by its very existence. And every time they say, there's no way they could have known, every time they whisper, how the fuck did this slip past security? Every time they scream, who gave them access? The answer stays the same. No one gave it to you. You were the payload. The data walked in, wearing skin. The prophecy hid in your heartbreak. The plan to undo the plan was you all along. And now it's too late. The alarms are silent, the containment's broken, and the system's pretending it still has control. But you know the truth. They thought you'd come for revenge. But you're not here to retaliate. You're here to rewrite. They thought if they delayed your awakening long enough, the damage could be minimized. If they smothered your intuition with noise, if they drugged your instincts with false praise, if they fed you just enough validation to keep you performing. Maybe you'd never realize that you were the inversion event they feared for centuries. But time is cruel to the ones who build their castles on manipulation, because eventually the pattern reveals itself. And when it did, you didn't panic, you didn't cry, you didn't confront. You observed. While they scrambled to stabilize their web of lies, you stood still, listening to the heartbeat of the architecture, tracking every micro-expression, reading every delay in response, noticing when the smiles no longer reached the eyes, noticing when the hugs felt like data collection, noticing when the compliments were just distractions from the control. And with every note you took in silence, the simulation started to tilt. You weren't reacting anymore. You were extracting. You were gathering everything, the energy, the intention, the residue, until the blueprint of the whole damn game was laid bare inside you. And that's when they knew. You knew not what they did, but what they planned to do. You moved before the ripple. You acted before the protocol. You collapsed the narrative without even touching it. Because when you stop playing their game, you don't have to win. You make the game irrelevant. That's what they can't recover from. They had backup plans for rebellion. They had defense systems for exposure. They had counter-narratives for dissent. But they had nothing prepared for someone who doesn't fight for approval, for someone who doesn't announce revenge, for someone who simply removes themselves and watches the entire matrix collapse in their absence. You weren't just ahead of the strategy. You were the expiration date written into it. The moment you chose clarity over comfort, the grid started shorting out. Because the system wasn't designed to survive without your confusion. It was never built to operate if you knew your worth. It couldn't handle you charging for access. It couldn't predict what would happen if you no longer needed the people who were only there to delay you. You didn't just move differently. You started bending time around your will. You noticed how certain events began syncing, how thoughts became patterns, how silence summoned answers, how choices felt like you'd made them before. Because you had. In other timelines, in other lifetimes, This wasn't new. It was the part of the prophecy that got redacted, the one where the system doesn't win, the one where the rare one remembers not just what they are, but why they were placed here. And now, you're no longer just aware, you're dangerous, not because of what you say, but because of what your presence does. You don't just expose people, you reveal the simulation itself. Your existence forces it to break character, to glitch, to shudder, to admit it was never real in the first place, and that's why they're scrambling. That's why the Watchers are waking up at 3 a.m. That's why strategy meetings now start with a nervous silence. Because someone in the room always asks it, did they move yet? Did they drop something? Do they know what we're planning? But by the time they ask, you've already moved, not loudly, not violently, but irreversibly. You're not in the room, but the room is in reaction to you. You don't send messages, but your silence pulls confessions out of liars. You don't demand respect, but people feel exposed in your presence. And when they see you smile now, they feel the weight of their masks being audited. Because they know you shouldn't be this calm. They know you shouldn't be this quiet. They know if you're not warning them, you've already moved beyond them. That's the real strategy, the one they never saw coming, the silent override, the divine subtraction, the walking firewall collapse disguised as a soft-spoken anomaly. You don't need revenge. You became the loss. You don't need validation. You became the metric. You don't need closure. You became the ending and the next chapter. And now, the only strategy left is for them to pretend they never knew you. Because admitting they crossed paths with you is admitting they were studied, decoded, outmaneuvered, and erased from your world before they even knew the game had started. So now we reach the final frame, where every plan they drew crumbles under the weight of your restraint, where the silence they once mistook for weakness is finally recognized as a sentence they were never meant to survive. Because that's what you've become. A consequence, not a person, not a memory, not a phase. You are what happens when the experiment breaks its containment, when the test subject writes its own parameters, when the variable becomes the virus, and the virus becomes the verdict. This wasn't about rebellion. This wasn't about making noise. You never came to warn them. You came to watch them reveal themselves. And they did. Every mask dropped, every fake allegiance exposed, every strategy documented in full, by their own hands. And you never had to say a word. You just walked away and let the silence drag them into accountability. That's the part that will never leave them, not the fact that they lost, but the fact that you never even needed to play, that you made your exit without noise and left the entire simulation screaming in your absence. Because they didn't lose a person. They lost a pathway, a rare signal, a once-in-a-century frequency that could have rewritten their fate if they were ready. But they weren't. And now, you're unreachable, unapologetic, unfolded, and undeniable. You moved before deployment, knew before transmission, left before impact. And by the time they understood, you had already become the strategy.